Hello and welcome back to the CPO Strategy Podcast. One of procurement's most persistent headaches, tail spend. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at exactly what tail spend is, why it keeps surviving transformation after transformation, and how it keeps slipping through the cracks. In this episode, we're joined by Axiom co-founders Alistair and Steve Ueckermann to unpack why this problem is so stubborn and how Axiom's platform is fundamentally taking a different approach to solving it. Enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome to the CPO Strategy Podcast.
Alistair, it's great to see you again. We met at DPW a couple of months ago now, wasn't it? And Steve, lovely to meet you. Are you both well?
All well, thank you. Yeah, good to see you again.
Very well, thank you.
Good. Pleasure to have you here. I love to start these podcasts by asking sort of the big why procurement, because this is a strange industry, isn't it? People sort of they come in and they don't really leave, do they? But nobody really sort of goes in sort of growing up and thinking, oh, I'm gonna go into procurement. Was that sort of similar the case for you? That long running joke of sort of jumping in here and never leaving?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, Steve and I have worked together probably about 30 years now. And I think when we first started, we were working with a lot of global organizations. We sort of started life off in the sort of BPO world. So over time, we've always touched procurement, but we've sort of crept closer and closer to sort of the procurement function. And then when we founded Axiom in 2020, we founded it really to scratch an itch around, how we could use data science and AI to drive better outcomes for sort of enterprise organizations. And that plugged us absolutely fairly squarely into not just procurement, but the digital transformation teams in these global organizations.
So to start things off, how would you define tail spend?
It's a great question. And actually, it's something that we've been covering over the last 2 or 3 months, starting off with a LinkedIn poll and then a couple of webinars. And, if we think about sort of contribution to the poll, we had 530 respondents from practitioners across 60 countries, 420 organizations, and 103 industries. So we feel like we had quite a good representation, and we asked them exactly that question. And the idea was we were trying to get to an industry definition of tail spend. What came out of that actually was really eye-opening in that people define tail spend very differently. And people were falling into the buckets of, we define it as an 80-20 spend split. We define it as a 20-80 transaction split. We define it by spend threshold levels. We define it by categories that we see as tail categories and strategic categories. And many people on the webinars were talking about actually they define it differently depending on both industry, and for some organizations, they find it differently by region. So the output of that was there is no clear definition, apart from the view that it is this area of unmanaged transactions that has a disproportionate focus of procurement activity, and where technology is failing. I think most people felt generally comfortable in talking about an 80-20 rule, with 20% of the spend accounting for about 80% of mainly indirect transactions.
I think it's very clear that it is undefined, and it will depend really on every single organization. They'll be operating slightly differently. I think the future is a world where spend is spend, not tail spend, and strategic spend is all spend. And you can get there with proper data, fix the data in your tail, do it properly with a platform like Axiom, and I think the problem will go away.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, because I think that's perfect. I think absolutely spend is spend, and it goes from spend that is either managed or unmanaged to all spend being under control.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be talking about tail spend in 10 years' time.
No, be a dirty word.
What is it about tail spend that lets it slip through every time, even in the most mature organizations?
I think the core issue is that tail spend is structurally inconvenient for everyone. It's really too fragmented for procurement to manage manually, too low value per transaction for finance to be really interested in it or to scrutinize it, and really invisible enough that nobody actually owns it. Um, so most teams know that the problem exists, but the big issue here is the effort to manage it. It's always been outweighed by the perceived return that you get from it, and I think this is where AI properly managed and focused can bring down that ROI or bring up the ROI massively and reduce the effort involved.
Yeah, lovely. Anything to add to that, Alistair, on your side?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think what happens is it creates a vacuum. So we must think in terms when we're talking about tail spend, we're not just talking about people in procurement. We're talking about users right across the organisation who need to, access to products and services sort of quickly. If there's no compliant route for them to buy something, easily, they will go and find the path of least resistance. So whether that's buying off catalogs, direct to suppliers they found, maybe even on Google, Pcard, etc. So, often it's not a sort of an issue of the system failing them; it's just not serving them, and they need things quickly, and they will just find that path of least resistance to get what they want because fundamentally they want to just get back to doing their day job.
Mm, mm. What do you think is sort of the thing that most organizations sort of misunderstand about it? Is there anything in particular that sort of they don't really think about or is sort of not thought about enough?
One of the sort of biggest challenges when people start to try and think about how to tackle tail spend is they're looking almost to sort of solve a data problem with a process. And I think you can put as many compliance steps in. You can have preferred suppliers, you can have PO limits, etc. You can have all of these things for people to follow. But as I said before, you've got thousands of people across the organizations making very low value, quick purchases. And you think of the tool set that's available to most organizations, you think of their source to pay systems, they're really geared to manage big strategic purchases. If you just think about the timescale it takes to onboard a new supplier in a
Mm,
source to pay environment in an enterprise organization, you're talking weeks, and we're talking about users who need to buy something in the next day or so.
I guess the other area is the payment. So um, the payment layer, which is it's almost always completely disconnected from procurement. And even when the buying side is handled well, um, the moment the transaction hits accounts payable or a card program, the data and compliance trail is broken. So there's a gap there that never gets closed. And it's where unmanaged spend lives.
mm. Why is that? Why have they been treated separately? Why have the buying and the paying been treated as separate entities essentially?
Um, well, I guess it's because you can't unify them when the data is bad. Um, so I guess when you unify them, something fundamental changes. And the guardrails on the buying side, approved suppliers, category controls, budget thresholds. Um, these apply at the moment of payment, and you can't circumvent procurement by going around AP because they're in the same system.
Mm,
Today, they are definitely two different areas because you have a buyer going out and making a decision outside of procurement's remit, and you've got the payment happening blindly through AP or via a card with no backing data. So when you get to look at the data, there's normally not enough information there to actually understand what was bought.
just to build on that, that data piece, when you get that bit right, the ability to sort of for transformation from both a sort of control and management perspective is significant. And I think when we look at the enterprise organizations that we're dealing with, often we'll ask them for a breakdown of their data, and it's not unusual for the largest category of spend to be classified as other, simply because they can't understand, what's been bought by whom, and they can obviously see when, but they just don't have the level of detail to really be able to even start to think about how to control this area. When you make that transformation, what you can see is extraordinary, both from a sort of a management perspective, but also a perspective of thinking about the bigger picture of how to evolve the management, how to evolve proper category strategies, etc. But at the moment, I think it's fair to say most organizations are sort of flying in the dark, and it all just is an annoying element of spend that people would just prefer to sort of turn their back on and look elsewhere.
What is the true cost of that for organizations? Like, can they really afford to do that, as we stand today in 2026?
Well, I think the big challenge with tail spend is, it's often low value purchases, and sometimes the cost of actually managing the purchase is actually greater than the value of the purchase itself. When you think about how people categorize and define tail spend, people do it very differently. Most people would use a Pareto 80/20 rule. They might use a threshold level, spend threshold level, whatever way they do it. But ultimately, what happens when you look at procurement organizations is they may only have 20% of their spend sitting in the tail, but they've actually got 80% of their resources trying to control this activity in an incredibly manual way.
And I guess, bringing it full circle onto Axiom now, in terms of Axiom's market pay, how are you closing the loop with that? And what makes it a different proposition from traditional tail spend tools or P cards?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess market pay is an embedded payments infrastructure, so it's not a bolt-on. Uh, that's but it's sitting inside the platform. So as a marketplace and sourcing, as part of the marketplace and sourcing engine. Um, so when a user completes a purchase, the payment uh, is processed within the same workflow. So no separate AP instruction, no manual reconciliation at month end, etc. And you have captured all the data that you need to capture to be able to properly um, report on it and get insight from every transaction.
And what sort of change do customers see? How much is this sort of changing the game for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we think about sort of a traditional P card approach, from a sort of control and compliance perspective, if you like, it always happens after the event. Somebody has found a supplier, they've put it on a P card, the reconciliation and almost authorization happens at sort of statement stage, which is, obviously can be weeks or months after the activities actually happen. So it's always been a retrospective attempt to manage it, which of course is just not how a modern organization wants to be. With market pay, the way the platform works is that all of that compliance, the approval of suppliers, the budget sign off, etc., happens at the gate before the transaction or activity even happens. And of course, what that is also doing at that stage is capturing incredible levels of data, which then allow people to make really strategic decisions moving forward. But the control moves from being a retrospective control to a complete, at the point of purchase or before the point of purchase control.
So it's a massive game changer then.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you've got control. I think you've got the control element. I think you are putting the power of the compliance in the hands of the platform, not in the hands of either the sort of, or the onus on the purchaser or the effort on the procurement person you're letting the platform do a lot of the sort of heavy lifting, if you like, as people like to call around this area.
Now, to move a little bit onto agentic AI. Now, I know that's built into every layer of the Axiom platform. Agentic AI is everywhere, isn't it? You go to any conference. I remember DPW in October. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's got agents. It's the big thing, isn't it? It's become the big thing anyway. So what does that mean in practice for users today?
Yeah, look, I think one of the challenges that people have with procurement systems in general, if you sit outside of procurement, is they're not particularly intuitive. You almost have to know where to go on a procurement system to actually, enact a transaction. I think what the agentic capability does is allow people to, talk to the system in natural language. And the system will then prompt them in terms of what they need to do. So I think that's a real sort of game changer in terms of the user experience. I think one of the things that we get from both procurement but from the business is we just don't want to be spending a huge amount of time on these transactions. So when you can literally talk to the system and it is self-populating and it is making decisions on your behalf in terms of what suppliers you can go to and approve, etc. It then becomes a tool that both practitioners and users across the business actually want to use.
That makes a difference, doesn't it? When it's actually something that they want to use rather than they're being forced to. um,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. Anything on your side, Steve, on that?
Yeah, I mean, for procurement's leadership, this really shifts from a reactive environment to being a very proactive way of dealing with the problem. So this platform is continually monitoring spend patterns, flagging non-compliant behaviors, um, indicating consolidation opportunities, surfacing and actioning insights. Um, it's not just a dashboard. It's actively involved in the process. Um, and across Tail specifically, we don't uh, really have dedicated category management. It's the piece that gets ignored entirely. So what we've created is a system that backfills that gap in human intervention and makes it easy. So that's where agentic AI can fill the gap, and yeah, the platform becomes the category manager of the long tail.
Hmm. And how much is that shifting the dial from sort of procurement being seen as sort of a policing function to more of an enabling one, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is a fundamental shift of what procurement is trying to achieve at the moment. I think there's sort of a couple of things in terms of procurement for too long has done procurements for procurement's sake, and I think what they want to do now is put tools and platforms in front of the users who actually want to use them, as we talked about before. I think procurement's great desire has always been to get spend under management. And in the traditional world, that means, under category managers, that means people. I think what we're looking at now is sort of terminology that talks about spend under control, and the control is being delivered through the technology. And with control comes better data, and with better data comes better insights and opportunities. So, I think what we're seeing is a change in procurement's mindset from, we've got to become the police or the admin center to manage these transactions, to a really valuable part of the organization that can make strategic decisions because they can see exactly what's happening, when and why, and the ability also to talk to the technology and ask it to run and generate reports and highlight opportunities for insights and improvement. That's a complete game changer. That's been missing in procurement previously. Prior to this, you'd be people will be sitting there throwing data at data analyst teams, hoping that they can put some shape around the data, let alone drive insights. So it's a fundamental game changer. Yeah.
Do you think all of this transformation, does it surprise you how much of a sort of a change procurement is undergoing, or does it not? Like, because procurement is obviously, as you've just mentioned there, is shifting from what it was sort of before, is it very siloed, very sort of stuck out on its own, to being sort of this value generator, being this sort of maverick and sort of driving the value in the C-suite. Are you surprised it taken you both by surprise, sort of that level of shift and how quickly it's moved?
No, I don't think so, because I think this is the whole reason why we started Axiom, because we saw the opportunity 6 years ago to do something different and to help in a field that we've been frustrated in for 25 years. So we'd seen the pain of procurement daily. We'd seen the damage poor data was doing, the inability for procurement to make sound, objective decisions based on data. It was always down to, this is what I think, this is my gut feel, or what is the consensus amongst a number of procurement people, and that's how decisions were made. I think we can move that on now to agnostic decision making, where you're making objective decisions because the machine is being totally objective about that. So I think in tail spend, I think that's very useful. I think you need the experience, the gut feel, the consensus when you're talking about strategic procurement. But this is tail, and it is a place that really comfortably it sits very comfortably with AI and the whole agentic piece.
When we said as we started the business, we came at it from a wanting to deliver insight and outcomes, and we talk very much about insight, action, outcome being a sort of mantra. I think our frustration when we look at procurement as a whole and some of the early sort of procurement suites is the focus was very much just around automating processes. And there's been a lot of noise about, bad data. If you automate bad data, you make the problem worse, et cetera, et cetera. Our view is that it's people have been looking in the wrong place. I think our view is at the start of a transaction, any transaction, anywhere in the tail, if the technology is enabling you to capture the right data and make decisions on that data, then from day one, you've got clean data into the platform. And every single transaction and activity that goes through the platform is recorded. It can be analyzed and assessed, and it can be part of the data set that then the agents can go to work on to understand what's happening. So I think there is going to be a fundamental shift between people leaving that old world of worrying about terrible data sitting in ERP systems and, woe is me. And I think that the technology now is, we are capturing clean data. That's a great start. And we're using technology to really understand what that data is telling us. And then we're going beyond that to actually understand what decisions can then be made using that data and scenario planning. If I did X, what does that mean? If I did Y, what does that mean? And then putting that information in front of the buyer to make the right decision. That's the fundamental shift. So procurement, to my mind, stops being this procurement for procurement sake entity that sits, in a hole somewhere in a business, and it starts to become, real value add to the buyers across the organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like the way you explained there about procurement for procurement's sake. That makes a lot of sense. In terms of sort of moving forward now, future facing, and to sort of build on what you just said there, Alistair. If we fast forward a few years and tail spend becomes managed spend, um, and it's not no longer this sort of blind spot. What does the modern procurement function of the future look like? And I think you've just sort of alluded to it there. But if you can maybe expand on that, what might the procurement function look like in I don't know, 10 years' time? With your crystal ball, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago where that very question was asked of about 60 or 70 procurement professionals. And it was really interesting, the sort of dichotomy of views from, on the left-hand side, people who would be talking about using technology to do what they're doing better, more effectively, to swinging the dial all the way over to the right-hand side, where there are a couple of people suggesting that procurement may not even be called procurement in the future. It may not need hundreds of people sitting there managing categories or what have you. The view is that it'd be very much more technology driven, very much more intelligence driven, and sitting in the business as a function that sits much closer to finance in particular, and cross between finance, IT, and procurement. And people were potentially talking about, maybe even the terminology is changed. So in the industry, the breadth of those views were basically across massive global organizations in the same sector. So you've got this, different view in the industry. But I think what we understand and know is it's going to be much closer, I think, to the right-hand side of that dial than it is to the left-hand side.
Lovely, thank you. And your side, Steve, is that something you agree with?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with it. Yeah, I think the future that we see, and not too far away, is a lot of the tail will be completely automated. So the machine will be making decisions rather than having human in the loop all the time. We're not there yet, but as soon as the data improves and the models are trained, we will see that shift happen at huge pace. So, there is a world where Axiom won't even have a UI. It will just be a box that does things automatically. And that's really where we think it will get to ultimately.
Yeah. Exciting times. Lovely. I think that leaves us to a good place to end it. So thank you very much for both appearing on the CPO Strategy podcast today.
That's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the CPO Strategy podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, make sure that you subscribe or like our social media pages so that you never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.